Corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, a championship-level golf course soon to open in City Park is more than about bogeys and putts. It also represents a new partnership for neighborhood redevelopment. We'll take a look. We'll also examine what to expect from the new session of the legislature, which convenes Monday, as well as the governor's trip to Washington. Tom Benson is making some business moves, including the beer business, and a former DA hears his prison sentence. All of this plus memorializing and monuments, both of which were in the news this week and are on the scorecard for tonight's Informed Sources. Teeing up are Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Jeremy Alford, publisher, LaPolitics.com, Kathy Finn, freelance business writer and author of a new book about Tom Benson, and Gordon Russell, managing editor for investigations, The New Orleans Advocate. We go over to Jeremy first because the day is quick to come. This Monday, the beginning of the Louisiana legislature's regular session, and would have a lot on board for this session: tax reform, incarceration. So how's it going to all play out?
Yeah, Monday is a continuation of, it's the beginning of a new session and a continuation of the same nightmare that we went through last year. There's roughly 300 tax bills filed right now, and no one really has a solid plan. The governor has presented a plan that at its centerpiece is this gross receipts tax that is you can kind of look at it as a corporate sales tax. That's not on the books right now, and I really haven't met anyone who has come forward and not only explained this tax, but has come out in favor of it. Look, if it takes you more than 10 minutes to figure out a tax at the Capitol, people start to feel like they're going to get screwed somehow, and so a lot of folks are hesitant about that. But there's some other moving pieces too. But the two numbers to remember are $440 million. That's the number that represents the shortfall for the fiscal year that starts on July 1st. I think lawmakers are going to go in, address that somehow, whether it's through cuts, revenue increases, or a mixture of both. But the other big number, the important number to remember, is $1.3 billion. That's the amount of temporary taxes that fall off in 2018, largely through a change in the sales tax where they added a penny last year. And that's where really the rub is on this session. The governor has a proposal being carried by Katrina Jackson that would lower the rate back to 4% and broaden the base, and it pulls in some really interesting businesses like massage parlors, escort services, Turkish baths. I'm really hoping that the owners of these businesses show up to testify, if nothing else, for entertainment value only. But it pulls in yard services, it pulls in subscription-based services, digital. Any newspaper or media outlet that has a digital wall that people pay for, that would have to be included in this sales tax.
Like Netflix, Hulu, all that.
On the opposite end of that, there's a proposal by Representative Tanner McGee, a freshman from Houma, that the business lobby is really taking a close look at. Conservative lawmakers are looking at it, and that would bring the rate down to 2% and completely clean the pennies. And when I say clean, I mean that take all the exemptions and exclusions out. I guess when we're talking about these escort services, those would be filthy pennies, right? But it's the same disagreements that we saw last year. The Republicans feel like they can cut their way out of the shortfall. The governor wants to see new revenue. The governor is taking on business and industry. We're seeing kind of a different tone with him, where he's saying that business is not paying their fair share. And the governor's kind of in a good position right now for messaging. If lawmakers don't respond, he can turn around and tell people, look, I tried to cut your taxes. He wants to cut taxes, individual income taxes, for about 90% of filers, but business wouldn't work with me, or that lawmakers wouldn't do their job. There's a lot of politics at play. There's a lot of stake in this session. Look, the governor has already said, if you don't do your job, I will call you back in a special session. So we could see a repeat of last year, which I don't think anybody wants to see. I mean, we've read great tragedies with better endings than last year's sessions. They worked more continuous days than any other legislature since 1812. It just was not a whole lot of fun to be involved at anything at the Capitol last year.
Go ahead, Gordon. You had a question?
I was going to say, if they don't solve it in the special session, could they have another special session next year before the regular session?
Yeah, that $1.3 billion figure, these temporary taxes that are coming off, could be addressed next year. They don't fall off till the end of June in 2018. The thing is, next year is a even-numbered year, and that means that they cannot address taxes in a regular session. It would have to be a special session. But I think the governor's going to dig in on this. I think if lawmakers don't give him something he feels like he can live with, he's going to call him back in a special.
Well, is the GOP presenting their plan other than saying cut?
Well, that was just a fascinating story in the Sunday edition of The Advocate about the Republicans and this plan. You hear different things depending on who you talk to, but no, there is not a document I can hand you right now that has the GOP plan on it. There's a document I can hand you right now that has the governor's plan on it. But Republicans have said that, look, we're going to have a guiding philosophy, kind of a philosophical blueprint of that we want to see more cuts, that we're open to expanding the sales tax base. They don't like the gross receipts tax, but probably what you're going to see happen is there are like I said, 300 bills that address taxes in some way, shape, or form. And I think you're going to see over the next couple of weeks the Republican delegation starting to say, we like this bill, we like that bill.
Coalescing around certain ones.
And talk about Constitutional Convention. Is that something that you had in the latest
issue
of La Politics?
I wrote about that this morning for subscribers of La Politics Weekly, and this is something you're going to continue to hear more about over the next few weeks, and that's the Constitutional Convention. Neil Abramson, who is the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, has filed this bill for a limited constitutional convention for almost a decade now, and it's never gone anywhere. And when I say limited, it means it's limited to certain fiscal issues. One of the big fears people have about a constitutional convention is, do we really want to pop the hood on the convention and let anybody get under it and do what they want to do? His bill would set up a framework by where a task force would study the issues, see if there's a need for a constitutional convention, and then maybe we would end up in one by 2019. Next year is the 45th anniversary of the 73 convention. It has been a very long time. There's been many constitutional amendments, but lawmakers can only cut health care. They can only cut education, and they'd have to get into the Constitution to change those dedications.
Okay, Jeremy, thanks. We'll be looking for the start Monday. Over to Gordon right now. And later this month, we're going to have a new golf course in City Park, but it's not just for golfing. It's also got a greater community good.
Yeah, it's kind of a complex arrangement. This is one of these public-private partnerships that you hear so much about. The golf course is going to open on April 21st. It's on the site of the old East and West courses on City Park, which have been closed since Katrina. The North course has been open for some time. And this is this sort of complicated arrangement whereby this outfit called Bayou District Foundation proposed they're going to run this golf course. They put a bunch of money into it along with the state. They put in $9 million. The state put in $17 million. And they're going to run the course, and then they're using their own money and profits from the running of the course, which of course hasn't opened yet, to help with some sort of soft services at the neighboring, the old St. Bernard Public Housing Complex.
Which is now Columbia Park.
Right. It was one of the big four projects which was torn down after Katrina. And so it's been redeveloped. It's much less dense than it used to be, and there's a lot less crime. It's been touted as a success, and it seems like a much more thriving community. I mean, there's of course there's far less public housing there than there used to be. There's about 1/7 as many public housing apartments there as there were before. And most of the people who used to live there are living with Section 8 vouchers somewhere else.
Mixed income.
It's a mixed income. That's how all the big four were redeveloped in the same strategy, with instead of having sort of concentrated poverty, which was the old model, there's a combination of public housing, sort of low-income housing, and then there's market rate.
So its linkages, and it's the Bayou District Foundation to City Park. I mean, it's an example of public-private partnerships, of these entities working together for something that betters the community.
Right. It's modeled on this East Lake community in Atlanta there was a golf course adjacent to a public housing development, and there was a partnership there where the golf course was used. The golf course had fallen into disrepair, partly because of the disrepair of the neighboring public housing complex, and there was a effort to put money back into the golf course and spruce up the neighboring community, and it seemed to work. And that was the pitch that these guys made after Hurricane Katrina.
And taking a quick look at the golf course, we said open later this month, and people say that it could bring professional tournaments back into New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's their hope. It looks, looks very nice. There's lovely oak trees. It's called Bayou Oaks, and it looks to be in great shape. And I think their hope is to bring tournaments back, and also to just have sort of a higher caliber of public golf. I guess the greens fees are going to run between like $60 and $100 for locals.
Okay. And once again, opening the end of this month, April 21st.
April 21st.
And actually, there's the park now says there's actually less acreage dedicated to golf than before Katrina.
Right. I mean, they went from having 4 courses to 2, so there's still there's been a lot of debate about the uses of City Park, but there is still a nice chunk of sort of wild space out there adjacent to the golf course.
Okay, Gordon, thanks a lot. Going to go over to Kathy right now, and Tom Benson again in the news for some different business moves that he's making.
Yes, well, he popped up this week. A local reporter found out that he may be looking at buying Dixie Brewing Company, which now the beer is not actually brewed here anymore. It's brewed in Wisconsin. But the original owners still live here, and of course the building itself has been redeveloped. Most of it has been redeveloped into something else associated with the University Medical Center. But it was kind of surprising to see that Tom Benson was looking at Dixie Brewing. And the talk was that he would be selling it at the Superdome for games and so forth. But I think it made a little bit more sense when several days later you heard that he has sold, in fact, now, WVUE television.
He still has a small interest in it.
I guess he still has a small interest. I think he sold the majority interest or something, but he sold it to Raycom Media, which has been managing this station since 2013. And the reason I think that they're related is because Mr. Benson always touted his purchase of WVUE as, for its local ownership, bringing the only station that actually was under local ownership. And they promoted that heavily, proudly locally owned. And so I think, when he decided to sell to Raycom, that maybe there was that feeling that, well, we ought to show our commitment to New Orleans in some way. So perhaps that's what the Dixie thing is about. And that has, we don't know the details of that yet and whether that actually will happen, but the rumor is certainly out there. So it would give him, a local brand in the Superdome, and there's nothing wrong with that, certainly. As to whether he would actually bring the brewing back here, that's another story, and who knows about that.
And right now it's being brewed in Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin, yeah.
So even though the label, just like having a wine, you're really buying the name and the label and have it made somewhere else and then shipped in here.
I think what we were hearing in that story was that it was going to be brewed in Memphis is the plan. At least that's the rumble.
At least a little bit closer to home, I guess. But, there were some other interesting things. It was a week for Benson News. We heard that he's also looking at really does want to launch an NBA development franchise here. Or it would not be located in New Orleans, but it would feed into the Pelicans. The idea is to develop talent for the Pelicans. And the word is that he's looking at various cities where it might be located.
Sort of in this region or sort of close?
I think it's not necessarily. I think they're kind of scattered around, which is not unusual for a development league. But I think that's a real interesting development. And I think also there were hints coming from Saints headquarters, from Greg Bensel, the communications chief there, that he says, well, watch for more big things from Tom Benson. Tom Benson turns 90 in July. And you got to hand it to him. He's still hanging in there and doing these deals. And I had heard, there was talk a few years ago that he wanted to develop a hotel, a hotel near the Superdome. And, that kind of died off when he was in the big fight with his family, and they were so tangled up in all of that litigation. But after that got settled, I had heard at one time that he was seriously looking at the Freeport-McMoRan building and was very close to purchasing it, as a matter of fact. And that is right across from the Superdome. And, of course, Freeport-McMoRan itself had very little presence in it anymore, and they've kind of fallen on hard times financially. So it would be an obvious goodbye, I would think, for him. So perhaps that's what the big stuff is that Greg Benson is hinting at.
He's hinting at right now. So
But we don't
And now
know.
you can have free beer.
And he could have free beer, too.
All right, so Tom Benson still making business waves in the
Yes,
city.
he
All
is.
right, Kathy, thanks a lot. Over to Errol right now, and the city got a bid on removing the monuments, and
Yeah, just want to
came out a
mention
little bit higher.
quickly, WVUE was the only locally owned commercial station, but this station, Channel 12,
Right.
is
My
apologies.
no,
Right,
no,
that's
it's not.
true, the community
It's
station,
it's a community-owned station. Yeah, it's not even state money. It's
it's community-owned.
It's community-owned station. A bid came in on the monument situation this week, and the administration reportedly put aside like $150,000, money that they stated that they've raised from private sources. They haven't revealed who those sources are. Bid came in at $600,000, which of course is significantly higher. So nobody is really sure where this is going to go now, or if it's going to go. And there are some people who say, and that if you really analyze the work that needs to be done, that to really do it would probably take a lot more than $600,000, especially like the Lee statue. I mean, having to go up there, and so no one is quite sure where this issue is. I may be the only person who thinks this, but to me it was significant that almost at the same moment, in the area of memorializing people, on Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard that day on Tuesday, they were dedicating these beautiful street repairs. And that area, which used to be a part of Dryas Street, which is named after a black woman who was an activist, has become a really popular street in New Orleans, so popular it even has its own abbreviation, OCH. And so you see activity on both sides. I mean, you see in terms of remembering people, you see some things happening, and other people saying, well, don't take ours away, that kind of thing. And so there's certainly room for a debate, more community debate on this whole topic. But for right now, we don't know where the issue stands.
Where the issue stands in terms of removing those monuments, also where they'd be stored and how much that would cost. That's a question out there, too, that we don't have an answer for.
And who the sources of this money is. I think an argument could be made that the community has a right to know who's providing the funding for a big public project like that.
Okay, story not ended yet. All right, thanks a lot, Errol. Going to go over to Jeremy, and the governor didn't really have such a great visit before Congress, a congressional committee this week.
No, he didn't. I mean, the governor was not only criticized by one of the members of his own congressional delegation, Garrett Graves of Baton Rouge, but by congressmen from other states too, really kind of weighed into him. And look, I spoke to the governor's staff about this, and they told me that they were fully aware that they were walking into an ambush, and there was nowhere else to go but to lean forward through this.
And this was all about flood relief.
It was all about flood relief and the floods of last year and the response to it, and how money has trickled down, and some of the controversial contracts. All the dirty laundry that Louisiana has on this flood recovery from last year, it was all aired in D.C. And it was really interesting to see the governor in this position, because the governor is a person who believes that the position of governor brings with it a certain amount of respect and reverence, and he's also quite scrappy. He is not a guy who will back down from a fight, and he was most certainly under attack from several different political angles.
You don't mess around with former Army Rangers, I guess, But, last night one of the TV stations, Channel 4, pointed out how one of the congressmen who was interviewing the governor asked him, if you knew this was going to be severe flooding, why didn't you say something in time? And his answer was, we didn't know. We didn't know it was going to be. And so the station examining the facts, and they talked to a flooding expert, and he agreed with the governor that they didn't know in time. So it does seem like that there was some questions that were, not for the governor's fault, but the information wasn't available. So it does seem like there was some kind of setup going on there.
Look, there's no doubt about it. It's politics. I'm not sure how that hearing serves the people in East Baton Rouge and Livingston Parish and North Louisiana who are still not in their homes and still rebuilding. This was nothing more than a political exercise, and I'm not surprised that it was aimed at Governor Edwards. He's received a lot of attention from special interest groups on the right that are, there's a super PAC out of D.C. called America Rising that is going after the governor almost on a daily basis, reaching out to reporters and floating stories. We've seen the Boston Globe is just one example of a publication that's listed Governor Edwards as on the short list of possible Democratic presidential candidates. I don't think the governor is in any hurry to embrace that after what we saw with Bobby Jindal. But there certainly was. And the fact that Garrett Graves was kind of at the center of this storm is only adds to the speculation that he himself is on the short list to maybe run for governor in 2019. I know that there certainly are donors who have approached him to think about it, and to see him going head-to-head with the governor kind of adds fuel to that fire. However, I will say this, that Garrett Graves is a guy who worked on the Hill as a staffer under Breaux, Tozan, Vitter. He was instrumental in the drafting of the Katrina-related policies. He was the head of the CPRA. That's all to say that, I really think Garrett Graves thought that this flood recovery was going to be his issue, that he was going to own this. And the governor managed to step up and take a little bit of that glory as well.
But we do have federal monies coming in for a recovery effort, right? We
do have some coming in. The word from D.C., though, is not to expect any more.
Really?
There's not going to be another bite of the apple. We'll have to wait and see if that's
Have we received
true.
enough? We haven't received nearly enough.
The money hasn't actually arrived yet, right? It's sort of, it's been approved, but we're waiting on.
But not allocated
the
yet.
check hasn't cleared, sort of, right?
But it's in transit. It's
right,
been appropriated.
they've approved it, yeah.
And enough? No,
I don't know about
not according,
okay.
according to the state.
But that initial amount of, 1.2 billion or 1.6 billion has been approved, and they're saying that's all we're getting.
Okay. All right, Jeremy, thanks. Gordon, over to you now. And Walter Reed was sentenced. He got his sentence, the former DA of St. Tammany.
Yeah, caught a break if going by the math. He was looking at the sentencing guidelines called for 9 to 12 years. This is a long-time former district attorney, Walter Reed. He was a DA for 30 years on the North Shore. Notoriously tough DA. The St. Tammany had the nickname St. Slaminy, which he really cherished. In fact, he gave out an award every year, the St. Slaminy Award, to the prosecutor who had really been toughest, and they sort of celebrated long sentences. So there was some irony in him getting a break like this, a guy who had been so sort of pitiless towards defendants. But the judge gave him 4 years instead of the 9 to 12, and I think it was maybe a reflection of the fact that the crimes, in some sense, weren't that serious. The case was a very good case, and that they really proved their case, and he was found guilty by a jury on 18 of 19 counts. But I think the judge maybe felt that the crimes themselves were not the most serious crimes.
Involving campaign finance laws?
Yeah, there were 2 schemes, and one of them involved misuse of campaign money, and I think there was a feeling like there weren't even really, the victims of this crime might not have even felt victimized. So I think it was sort of a compromise. The other thing to remember is this is a man who's 70 years old, and he's, 4-year prison sentence is still pretty serious. He's also got to pay, I think, around $1 million in restitution, and he's, been run out of office. He's been discredited. You could argue that he's paid a fairly stiff price for all this.
It's all not a good situation, that's for sure. He's appealing, though. He's appealing his conviction.
He's appealing, and the judge unusually has allowed him to remain free pending his appeal, which could last 2 years. And I think that's a reflection that the judge thinks the appeal could have some merit. And among other things, the appeals court could decide that the 2 schemes that were the center of the trial, that those have to be tried separately.
More than his 4-year sentence, he seemed most relieved by his son just getting probation, not having to go to jail.
Yeah, I think that was a big relief, and no parent ever wants to see their child go to prison, especially in a scheme that he was sort of the father was sort of the mastermind of the scheme. So I think that was a big relief for him, certainly.
Okay, so pending appeal.
Yep.
So this sort of still goes on. It's not completely resolved yet. All right, thanks a lot, Gordon. Well, this week we had some sad news regarding longtime host of Informed Sources, Larry Lorenz, who passed away this week. Errol, I know you had some words.
Well, just taking a couple of thoughts about him is that, one, he was a real linguist. He was someone who really appreciated the language, and we'd have outside a lot of discussions about language and wording of things and wording of scripts and so like that. But he was also, that made him also very good with puns. And I think one of his hallmarks that people had talked about was his segues, where he'd pick up on a word and then move into the transition. He also did a lot of work, especially early in his career, with the Press Club, and did a lot of work with their scholarship program, and made some real contributions to there in his capacity as a journalism professor at Loyola. When Loyola had a bigger print program than it has now, there's a lot of print people who went through him, at Loyola.
Right, I know he really did. He taught a lot of journalists and prepared them for the world of journalism. I personally, I didn't work with Larry. Sometimes I was lucky enough to get on the panel of Informed Sources while he was hosting, and definitely that was sort of his signature, was his glib transitions. But
I used to give him a lot of static about the segue.
Did you?
Larry, that segue is a new low for you.
Well, he was here for 22 years in this seat for Informed Sources, and he and, of course, Errol, who's been with the show for almost from the beginning, when we started it back in 1984. I mean, between the two of you guys, you kept Informed Sources on the path and have really made it like a mainstay for New Orleans television. We have so many people coming to us saying Friday night isn't Friday night without watching Informed Sources. And let me just say, anybody who comes to us and says that they really enjoy watching, we really appreciate your saying that, and we really do appreciate you tuning in. And Larry was part of the growth of this show, and to have it, just as I said, a mainstay in this market. We certainly have sent our deepest condolences to his family, Larry Lorenz, who was here for 22 years at WYS. Okay, it's time now to look ahead.
Okay, well, this isn't actually looking ahead, but I want to acknowledge in the same capacity the loss this week of Lolis Edward Eli, who was a civil rights activist. He was an attorney. He was actually one of the first, perhaps the first, black law students out of Loyola University. And we were talking a while ago about Dryades Street. He started off as a young attorney, his office on Dryades, which was becoming a big commercial area in the black community, was active in the Dryades YMCA, but was also part of a movement because in the early days of Dryades, that was where a lot of blacks could go and shop because they couldn't go to Canal Street, but the clerks weren't black. And so he was involved in a lawsuit to open that up too. And so now you see that. You see Lolis Eli, his success with that, when I was mentioning a while ago. Now that area is named after someone who was a colleague at that period of time when they were at the Casa Haley. So it does show some level of progress out there. And a lot of people here might be familiar with his son, Lolis Eric Eli, who was a columnist at Picayune, who was also a playwright, who wrote some, and who was involved with the Treme Project, and is a real student of street culture in New Orleans.
Yeah, a really important citizen of New Orleans. Our condolences to the Eli family as well. Let's go over to Jeremy.
Obviously, session starts on Monday. It'll be a slow start due to Easter, but I think April is going to be the last month that candidates can play footsie with the state treasurer's race. And for mayor, we're supposed to get some news in May as far as what people are going to be doing.
Okay. Kathy.
Back to Larry for a minute. A mutual friend of mine, of ours rather, was talking this morning about Larry and said, I really hope in the eulogy nobody brings up the word iconic, because Larry really hated the word iconic. So my commitment is I will never use the word iconic when I'm talking about Larry Lorenz.
Okay.
It's a worthy commitment.
Gordon.
I was going back to Baton Rouge for a second. My thinking of this session is that if the legislature has an opportunity to kick the can down the road, they usually will, and I would expect that maybe they won't take on this fiscal cliff, and we'll see a special session or two down the road. But hopefully not.
And we hear groans from Jeremy. Okay, guys, thanks a lot for being here. Thank you all for joining us. Of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod & Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.